Hello, hello. My name is Jess, and this is Patient POV. And today we are hearing from Shedrica, and she has lupus, and she is a mom, and she's also a chronic illness advocate, specifically for lupus. She has her own podcast called Lupus Speaks, and I'm so excited for you to get to hear from her. Before we dive in, there's a few things I want to chat about. So the first thing is I am launching slash is available now is a website called Patient POV, all one word, .ca. So patientpov.ca. And that is going to have recommendations from the podcast, anything that we've talked about that has been recommended. It's listed and available for you to purchase if you so wish. It also has a blog, which I'm starting to work on more and more, which is super exciting. And it has to do with either the podcast, it might have to do with my own thoughts, it may have to do with product recommendations or recipes. It's kind of like a hub of everything almost. So I'm working on building that out. And then there's also a section of the website which has the podcast information. And so if you're ever looking, if you don't consistently listen to this podcast and you turn on and you go, I don't know which episode to watch or listen to, then you can go to the website and it has a list of conditions and you can pick which condition you want to hear about or which category of things you want to hear about. And you can see them all listed there. So I've worked super hard on this. And if you want to go to it, that's patientpov.ca. So that's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to talk about was something called worry once, worry well. It's something I had discussed with my therapist recently, actually. But in this episode, later you'll hear we're talking about prepping when you have a chronic illness. So then a few weeks later, after we recorded this, I ended up talking to my therapist, and something I had been nervous about, or maybe it wasn't, we talked about this around Christmas time. So maybe this was before our episode, but it sparked a memory as I was re listening to this episode before posting it here. And so, long story short, this is called Worry Once, Worry Well. So, in my instance, I was getting really nervous around Christmas time about potentially getting sick with more people around. And I was worried about having to end up in the ER, just because when I get sick, sometimes my heart can't. My heart doesn't react as well to getting sick or an illness or things like that. And so I was worried about having to go to the hospital. And so rather than just having these thoughts ruminate and just continuously be anxious over the same thing, we decided to put action to it. And so that meant prepping for in case of that thing that you're nervous about happens. So you start with a negative worry, and it is either something that you can change or something you can prep for, or it's something you can't. If you can't prep for it and you can't, it's just like a nervousness or a worry about something you can't prepare for, you can't change. Then those are when you implement things like relaxation, calming, yoga, grounding exercises. Those are the things. And then you come to a point of accepting that you can't change it. And then that's kind of that pathway. But in terms of an idea where you can prep for something, so when we're specifically looking at chronic illnesses, something that a lot of us worry about is a flare up, right? And so we talk about it in this episode, but prepping for a flare rather than just sitting there being worried about a flare, you can know that you're prepared in case a flare does happen. So that's where the worry once, worry well comes in. You sit down and you worry very well. You write down everything that could go wrong. You write down everything that you are actually worried about in that circumstance. And then you go through each point and you decide, is this something that you can either change? Is this something you can prep for? Is this something you just have to accept? And so you go through everything. And so for my instance, we were talking about having to go to the ER, like I mentioned. And so we went through the list, and like something I was worried about was what are we going to do with my dog, Elda, who's a service dog in training. And so we came up with a plan on what we're going to do with her. Or that would be like if I'm on bed rest as well, like what are we going to do with her? And so I was able to go through each thing on my list. As the other example that we were going with in terms of a flare, if you were living alone, for example, what kind of meals will you have? Like, because you'll still have to eat, hopefully. And so that was one thing of on a good day, prep meals and have it frozen in the freezer and write on it what do you set the temperature of the oven at and how long do you cook it for, and then it's ready to go. So if you're ever in a flare, you can just pop it in the oven and it doesn't take as much work as having to figure out and then cook your meal. So those are just some things you guys can think about. And yeah, I'm super excited for you to jump right in. Once again, if you want to find me on Instagram, I'm Jess underscore and underscore Elda, which is ELDA. And please feel free to subscribe, share this episode if you think of anybody who could use the information that we came from it. And yeah, thank you guys so much. And I hope you all have a great week ahead. Hello, hello. How are you today?
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Do you want to just start by introducing yourself and kind of giving us a little background into who you are in your health journey?
Okay, my name is Shedrica Holmes, and I live with lupus. I've been living with lupus for 15 years. Um, I currently am, uh, I guess, building this online community and space for advocacy, lupus influencers, and entrepreneurs to highlight their stories and how they take their story and turn it into an opportunity.
That's amazing. Yeah. And what made you want to get into that?
I guess because I I hate to be like this, but I get overwhelmed by what I see all the time when it's just the symptoms, it's just the pain, it's just the struggles of what we live with as far as chronic illness. That's mostly what I see put out there. And I don't mind that people are sharing their stories and their experiences, but it's just usually the negative side of things. So I wanted to highlight the positive side of things and how to overcome and bring light to, you know, being able to have life outside of just living with the chronic illness.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like why I wanted to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And so is your page primarily for lupus or is it primarily for any chronic illness?
It's specifically geared to lupus. However, it does have chronic illness tips and strategies that anyone could use.
Amazing. Yeah. And I know you said you don't like focusing on the negatives and whatever, but are there any particular challenges that you face? And then with that, are there any coping strategies you found that works really well?
Um, so on my journey, I've had different chapters as far as like how severe my chronic illness is to when it's in remission to it going back into a flare and then going back to, you know, just kind of being managed. Um, so a backstory as far as when I first was diagnosed, I struggled with just everything: pain, hair loss, weight loss, not being able to eat. I lost my ability to walk and talk. And I pretty much had to be reprogrammed all over again like I was a baby and taught how to do everything all over again. So that was like my toughest struggle. Um, when I'm going through a flare up, it usually comes from stressful times or environments or situations, which usually comes out in my skin.
Hmm.
And so I'll have really big whelps and rashes. They call it chronic hives. And so it because of the type of lupus that I have, which is SLE, it affects your organs, and your skin is your biggest organ of your body. So it attacks my skin versus like my kidneys or liver or heart or anything like that. It usually attacks the skin. And so my biggest struggles have been dealing with that. As far as management, I would just take different types of medications and things like that. But overall, I just rely on my faith.
Mhm. Wonderful. And so, when you talk about your supports and your, coping mechanisms, I should say, what would you say your support system looks like now compared to how it looked like, 15 years ago when you were saying you were getting diagnosed?
It looks different mainly because back in 2008, I feel like lupus wasn't really talked about as much. So it wasn't a lot of resources, um, programs, or support to lean on anyway. So my support system back then was literally just my mom and like small groups of people in my family. But we all were kind of just figuring it out because again, it wasn't much information and a lot of access to things that we do have now. So the difference is definitely the online space because you are able to see what it looks like for different people. You're able to connect and relate to others. There's just a lot more information and offers in order to support us in mental health wise or connecting with their spirituality and also just overall wellness. It's like that is the message that's put out there. And it's just on all across the board. It's not just somebody who has chronic illness. It's just like wellness is just vital and more important and well sought out after. So you got a lot more information to access. So it's different now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, if we're looking at you in particular, what would a day in the life look like for you? If there's a typical
Well,
day.
yeah, a typical day, it just depends because if I'm in remission and I'm managed, then it's just mom life. Like I'm a stay-at-home mom of two, and I'm a fiance, so it just kind of looks like the typical day to day as an average mom would be: grocery store, school runs, dinner, the doctor, the maid, the Uber driver, like that. That's usually typically my day to day. But when I'm in a flare, that kind of scales back a lot, and I have to lean on my support system in order to kind of come in and pick up some of the things that I'm just not able to manage.
Yeah, fair enough. And how, I don't talk to too many people on the podcast who have kids, so I'm always interested to know how it is managing being a mom and managing a chronic illness.
Um, It definitely has its struggles. So I actually had my chronic illness prior to having kids.
Mm,
So I don't really know any different, versus someone who, gets it after, you know, having their children. So it was always something that I desired, and I aimed to have children because I was told that I couldn't, and that was kind of like one of those stories where it's like, no, you're not gonna rip my dream away from me. I want to be a mom. Now, circling back, I probably should have thought more about the ins and outs and like what it would take a toll on them as well
mm.
as they're watching me go through my struggles and managing, just the symptoms and just the day to day life. But it's definitely a challenge. It's not easy, but nothing in life really is. You just kind of take it for what it is, appreciate what you have, and keep it going.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. I like that. And you were mentioning you were getting diagnosed 15 years ago and that there wasn't as many resources or support or things like that. And so, how was it getting diagnosed? Was it a fairly simple, I mean,
No,
nothing's ever simple with chronic illness, but how was it for you?
no. It was it was hard because like I said, I was having the symptoms of hair loss, weight loss, and all that. And then being younger, because I was 19, when I started to receive symptoms. So at that time, you don't really have like your own insurance and things like that. I was fresh in college, well, community college, so you don't get that either. And so figuring out like what was wrong with me and getting the resources, the help that I needed, it was hard because of the lack of insurance at that time. And I mean, in 2008, it was like the economy crashed. Then we had our first African American president. So it was just like a lot going on during that time. So resources was definitely in lack. So it was hard to find a doctor that was willing to see me. And I feel like I didn't get the help that I needed until I was at the severe point of having to be put in hospice.
Mm.
And that's when it was like, oh, so disability came easy at that point. It was like you have to pretty much be literally on your deathbed before you could get the help that you needed. Here in America. It's harder.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
get that free healthcare. So it was definitely hard to get a diagnosis and really be seen and taken seriously because I was so young. And so they didn't believe that something was really wrong with me and that I was actually in pain and something was seriously wrong.
And so did you ever encounter a situation where like doctors are telling you something that is false or like the medical gaslighting you were kind of alluding to that.
Yeah, because like I said, it started out in my skin.
Mm.
So they just was just giving me stuff for the itching. And they weren't able to really dive deep and go into like, because I'm saying I have joint pain, I don't feel good, I have these migraines, my vision is blurry. They weren't looking at all of the other symptoms. They were just kind of like, oh well, just give you something for the itching. So it wasn't taken seriously.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And so, um, going into this, you were mentioning that you appreciate the support system that social media has created now, but is there any other resources or things that you are involved in that you find very helpful or useful?
Absolutely. So my number one, I feel like prior to having kids, let's say just like that, prior to having kids, I didn't really take my illness as serious because it was kind of like that space of grief and shame and just overwhelmed of having to deal with like, okay, I'm young and I'm having to struggle these types of struggles. And so mentally I wasn't in the best headspace. But once I had my first daughter, that's when I was like, okay, you can't play these games. You got to be serious. You got to lay down the law. You got to take your health seriously. You have something to live for that's bigger than you. So then, what do you need to do? And that's when I found a love for planning and creative planning. I don't know if you are familiar with what we do with the paper planners, with the stickers and the whatnot, and all of the like. I became obsessed. Like so I literally planned every aspect of my life. So it was easy to manage life and symptoms because of the resource of a planner and writing everything down. Because with lupus, it was in my brain and it was like the brain fog of forgetting everything. And I had responsibility, so I couldn't forget stuff. So planning and writing everything down is probably my number one resource and tool because you are in control of what is going on at that point. It gave me a sense of control because, like, lupus is something you can't control. So being able to prepare or plan things out in advance to be ready for, because I don't think that a lot of people with chronic illnesses plan in advance for um, the times when it's not well. And so that's setting up people around you, setting up meal plans and things like that, freezing things, just being more prepared with planning helped manage everything. And still to this day, I use it. I'm still obsessed. I have to plan.
That's awesome. Yeah, for sure. That's actually a tip that I haven't heard yet, and I think that's awesome. So not only the planner, but then also planning for the event of a flare, which is eventually inevitable, but just making sure that you're set
Right.
up to be successful during that time, so you can heal yourself as well,
Yeah.
or feel
Yeah.
better at least. um,
Yeah.
so do you have any words of encouragement or advice for anyone who is either getting diagnosed, recently diagnosed, or like in the middle of a flare? Anything for them?
Yes, I would say the number one thing is to get informed, like really educate yourself on whatever chronic illness that you are dealing with. That is probably the most important thing because what you don't want is those doctors telling you about yourself because they don't fully understand. It's the textbook version of their understanding. A lot of them don't really know. And
Mm.
so when you do your own research, when you come to them about medications that you would like to try, I think that's again the planning part of it is of being aware of what's going on with yourself because you're the only person that can really advocate for yourself. So I feel like that is probably the number one tip. As far as words of encouragement, I would say find some type of source of strength within your faith or self love because the way that you treat yourself is how other people around you treat you. And I say that as in when you start to be really down on yourself and real hard on yourself, I feel like people tend to be a little unkind with their words. They're not as gentle because it's like, oh, you're just woe is me, or you're just faking, or you're just, and then or you're always complaining, or you always have something. So I just feel like finding a way to speak good of yourself, then people will start to speak good to you.
Amazing.
Um,
Yeah.
and then as far as like diagnosis, I would say just again, do your own research, take time, give yourself grace because it is a uncomfortable space and to be in because you are vulnerable and weak at times. And so you just gotta love on yourself. That's probably like, you have to love on yourself. You have to affirm to yourself, be as positive as you can. Cause I know it's times where you just can't. Like, but do your best and look for those resources where you can find support and positivity and inspiration.
Amazing. Yeah. And my last question, one that I try to ask everybody who comes on the podcast is there any TV shows or movies that you're into of like you're really into right now, watching right now?
I should be ashamed of this, but I
No, no,
love reality TV shows,
love
and I
that.
probably have too many that I watch. So I couldn't even give you. I like all the housewives and all of like. I just love them all. It's very entertaining for someone who just is
No.
at home all the time.
Yeah, yeah. What was the last one you watched? The last one you just watched?
The Real Housewives of Potomac.
Ooh, okay. I love
Yeah,
that so much.
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate you taking the time.
And thank you for being so patient with me, figuring this all out.
Of course.